Unemployed and Afraid acknowledges the traditional owners of the land we have recorded this episode on and of the land where you, the listener, are tuning in from. We would like to pay our respects to elders past, present, and extend our respect to any First Nations, Aboriginal, and Torres Strait Islander people joining us today, acknowledging that this always was and always will be Aboriginal land.
Welcome to Unemployed and Afraid, a podcast that explores the glorious mess of building brands, businesses, and a career you love with the people who've done it. I'm your host, Kim Curtin. Thank you for being here. Let's get into today's story of starting over. Welcome back, passionate brand and business building humans. I am honoured to have your ears for another episode of Unemployed and Afraid and another very inspiring story of starting over to keep you motivated and growing. This episode holds a lot of subjects and lessons that I've been navigating through over the past months, years really, being at that point of really building into something when things start to get a bit clearer and you feel ready to focus and double down. There's just some lessons that I'm finding you have to push through those pesky lessons. There's new ones at every single turn. It's with my incredible guest, Michelle, founder of branded podcast agency, The Peers Project, that we talk about normalizing the stop, start, try a new thing and another thing into the journey that is figuring out your business. It doesn't happen to everyone in business, but it happens to a lot of us that the path isn't linear and isn't clear straight away. We talk about the need to up the ante for yourself, to take an action so that you can't back away from what it is you really want out of fear. Seriously, why is fear of success almost scarier than the thought of failure? Seriously. And learning to put yourself out there so much that you eventually lose the shame. So important to just throw things out there and learn from your experience, not give a shit what anybody else thinks, and to just keep going. I've been working with Michelle for a few months now, consulting and supporting on business and creative strategy, and have absolutely loved it. Collaborating, troubleshooting, being creative on something other than my own projects has actually made me more focused and creative on my own business building, which is food for thought in case you were ever tempted to believe that working with others on their business takes too much away from yours. She's an absolute gem of a human, makes me laugh pretty well every day and inspires me endlessly with her exuberance. I hope you enjoy my chat with Michelle Akhidenor. I'm chatting today with millennial powerhouse Michelle Akhidenor, founder and CEO of leading Australian podcast agency, The Peers Project, who produce podcasts embedded in cultural conversations for visionary brands like Indeed, Shopify, Modibodi, Estia Health and Alibaba. Starting off the back of her own successful global podcast, Peers to Peers, Michelle created a fully remote company well before it was cool, with a unique freelancer and employee mix that creates a diverse, multi-skilled team ready to make banging podcasts for brands all over the country and beyond. As Australia's only BIPOC female-led podcast agency and 2021 Australian Podcast Awards Finalist, Michelle instills a strong focus on raising diverse voices and stories, seeing TPP and their podcasts featured in Marie Claire, Smart Company, B&T, Mumbrella, Rag Trader, and of course in the charts. She forges her way past the inevitable challenges and self-doubt when starting a business in a competitive market with a focus and drive to succeed in her own way. Mish, I cannot wait to hear your story. Welcome to Unemployed and Afraid.
Thank you so much, Kim. It's so excited to be here. I'm so excited for this.
I know, me too. We do spend a lot of time on the phone normally and on calls. So it's the same, but different this time. This time is all about you. So easy one to start off with. Tell me, how would your best friend describe you?
Ooh, that's a good one. Loyal, ambitious, #girl boss, although I don't really like the girl boss vibe, but yes, and generous. She probably also says, chaotic, freaking wild card. So if we're going down that road, I can speak to that also, but
Oh, we can always go down that road. It's okay. So let's talk about before the Peers Project, before Peers to Peers, the pod. Who were you?
It's so funny that you asked this question, and it's been something that I've been reflecting on actually quite a lot recently. End of year vibes. I know you guys, it's fresh into the new year now when you're listening in, but thinking back over, 2022 and at the end of the year, it always makes me question, wow, how far have we come? What have we done? And it's naturally, as a business owner, it's very much so related to the business, the company, but then also my own personal journey through that, because we all know that it is such a personal journey. And it's actually funny because I can hardly remember my life pre-Peers Project. And I'm sure many entrepreneurs will say that to you. It was a different era. I mean, in the last year, we turned 5. So the business turned 5 years. And so if I think back half a decade, I was very lost. I was very confused. I was very young, and I had a burning desire to do something different, but I had no idea what that was.
Where do you think that desire came from?
Definitely the way I grew up and my parents. So to give you a bit of context, I am a woman of color. My parents are immigrants, and my mum is Greek. So she came over, was actually born in Australia, but when all the Greeks came to Oz in the 60s, and my dad's Nigerian, and they actually met over in Greece. And it's a bit of a story about how they journeyed back to Oz. But coming from a household where it's really that hustle, work hard mentality just to kind of live and survive to start off with, definitely was ingrained in me at such a young age. And me and my sisters, I have 2 sisters. And if I think back to even, if I think back to like primary school, I was always trying to become class captain or the head of the sporting club or whatever it was. It was always just ingrained in me of like, if you're going to do something, do it well. You have to be the best, which, naturally had negative effects also as well as positive. But my parents ended up growing quite a successful company. They've run together for 30 years. And so just seeing them knee deep in business since literally my whole life, they started the business before I was born, and just the grit, determination to make it in this country and to build something for their family and beyond was just something that, unless you've been through it, it's really tough to describe how much that instills in you a level of ambition and grit and determination to kind of make something of yourself.
They must be very proud of seeing you go on that journey.
Bless them. Oh my goodness. They're just the biggest sweethearts. And, they're semi-retired now. So it's definitely a different story.
I love that for them. I feel like I'm only ever going to be semi-retired in my life. I don't think I'll ever be an actual retirement. It's just going to be do the stuff that you love for as long as humanly possible. There must have been a moment where you sat down at your computer, determined to work for yourself, knowing that, yep, this is going to be my path. Where did you start?
It's so funny because I think when you look back and when you think about the journey, I always wish I sat down and thought, okay, now I'm going to start a business, but it wasn't really like that for me. I think I just was so frustrated with where I was at. And it was almost that frustration with, I have no idea how I'm going to make an impact in this world. Why am I here? How am I wrapped up in this world that feels so unnatural to me, which was at the time with the corporate world. Although I was super young and I'd only been in that world for like a year or 2, I knew it wasn't right. And I think for me, a lot of the frustration at that time came from this feeling like I had so much to give and that my quote unquote gifts weren't being seen or heard or, and weren't being recognized. And it's no one's job to do that other than me. And so I think when I sat down or when I thought about what else out there could I be doing to realize some of this and to make a bit of an impact or to do something different, I think for me, it came to people. I've always been a people person. I've always loved learning directly from someone, asking them the questions. And that just felt so natural to me. When I wanted to get into corporate, I would set up all the meetings with all the heads of, I was in finance at the time, of the banks and the big 4. And I would just literally get meetings with them and go for coffee and learn and build my network that way. And I just thought, well, let's just apply that exact same principle to this new thing I want to dive into, to this discovery that I want to have around what is it that I actually want to be doing. And at the time for me also, I had a very keen interest in business, although I don't think I understood. I didn't didn't understand what that meant, but always around commerce and business. It's what I studied. I always loved just marketing and that kind of thing. And so for me, it was, I want to sit down with people who are in business, who are doing what they're passionate about, and just chat to them. And that's where the idea for the podcast came about.
I really see that for you in terms of getting these meetings with people and sitting down. And of course, I've got the benefit of knowing you. And yeah, I just see that so much. It's such a beautiful thread that you have that confidence to approach people and say, look, I need to learn from you. I want to learn from you. Can you please give me some of your time? Where do you think that confidence comes from?
Oh, that's a good question. I think for me, it was instilled in me at a very young age. So growing up, as I said, it was all about, you be the best, you always put your hand up, be the leader, you've got this. And that's really that my parents championed that in me and in my sisters also growing up. And so having that constant confirmation and just kind of push in a good way to speak up and to put your hand up and to be the best almost made me a bit delusional, to be honest with you, for a period there. But I think that was just instilled in me. I think they always say up until 7 years old, whatever you learn during that time is what stays with you for life. And I was class captain at 5 in prep. So that was when I was 5. And so I think that leadership and that confidence around, you were meant to. It was almost like I believed I was meant to. Delusional, I know, but that I was meant to stand up and have my voice heard and stick up for what I wanted, essentially, or went after what I wanted. And so definitely from being instilled in that as a child. And then also I think naturally as I grew up, the more and more notches, quote unquote, that you get on your belt, the more and more you believe that you can do stuff. And I think for me, that's so shown up in my business journey as well. Now, even today, it's the more notches we get, the more I feel, okay, even if things aren't working out, even if things get really tough, hang on a second, I've been able to do X, Y, Z. We've been able to achieve this. So let's just keep going. And so, yeah, I think it was the more I achieved, the more I felt confident in who I was and what I was doing, which again, may also kind of had a negative effect as well, because it means I can't do anything half-assed. I have to go 150%. And sometimes that, the burnout creeps in, but that was kind of how it played out for me.
Yeah, look, I think a healthy dose of delusion is something that we could really all pay to have at different stages in our life. Why can't we bring that energy of the young self and what we believe to be completely possible into those adult years? It's so easy to get beaten down by, I can't do this, or I'm wrong to think that I could do this. Why? Who says? Maybe that could be my new post-it note that sits on my desk for the next 12 months, which is have a bit of healthy delusion, gal. Let's just go for it. Tell me about the 150%. How does that play out for you?
Yeah, it plays out in the smallest of things that I do, but also in the biggest. And I, if I think back to starting my business or starting the podcast at the time, it wasn't just, I'm going to start this. So again, just to circle back for all of you amazing humans listening in, the desire to quench this thirst I had around and just kind of squash this frustration I had around not being able to do or get my gifts out there and kind of do more and make more of an impact and be bigger. That, as I mentioned, culminated into my desire to want to chat to people, young entrepreneurs, young business owners, about how they pursue what they're passionate about. And that actually turned into, I was actually explaining this to a girlfriend at the time who was feeling a similar kind of, feeling that I was. What am I doing? Where am I at? How am I going to actually try and align what I genuinely care about with my work and with what I want to do with my life? And she was like, oh my goodness, I want to hear these conversations with these young people that you're going to reach out to. And I was like, oh, maybe I'll just record them. And this was back in 2017. And I say back in 2017, I know I'm very young, but 5 years ago, the idea of podcasts and podcasting was in Australia at least, was very new. It was not mainstream. It didn't, even the big podcasts that you think of today, a lot of them didn't start until 2018. So it really was before the time of the podcast. And at that time, my sisters were really into podcasts and we were kind of really some of the few that were into it. And I was listening to a podcast at the time. So I thought, stuff it, this new thing, it's easy. I don't have to show my face. I can just literally record and get it going. And so that was where the idea for my podcast, Peers to Peers, which then my business is built off the back end of that came from. And to circle back to your question, how does that play out for you going 150%? At that time, to give you an example, it played out as, so now I'm going to start this podcast and I'm not just going to kind of go half-ass. If I'm going to do this, it's going to be awesome and it's going to be big and I'm going to go hard. And so that actually resulted in me booking a flight to New York and starting it there. And actually, so to give some context, a lot of the young entrepreneurs I wanted to interview at the time were from this list that's the Forbes Under 30 list. And, just they fascinated me so much. And a lot of them were based in New York. And so at the time I was like, stuff it. If I'm going to do this, I'm going to fly to New York City. I'm going to book these meetings with these people and I'm going to sit down with them and ask them how they did it. And again, that 150%, that's an example, I guess.
I love that. I mean, why not? Why not do that stuff? Why not look at the idea that's on the table and go, how do I make this as big and as extreme as possible? How do I flex my edges there and see then what's possible over the edge? If we create something comfortable, which 100% encouraged, create something comfortable just to see how it feels. But then why not also flex the edges and see how far you could go with something? I think that's awesome. Who was the first person that you interviewed and how did it go?
Oh, I love thinking back. I also have to preface this. I had no idea about podcasting at the time. Obviously, now it's what we do as a business, but no clue. Like I literally had absolutely no, I'd never been in media. I literally had never done anything like it. And so the only thing I knew I could do was I knew how to speak. And that was my only one thing under my belt. I was like, I can do that.
Good start. Yeah.
Great start. So Alexa Buckley, and she was actually the first person that responded to my many a LinkedIn DM, which went unnoticed by so many. Fair enough. A random girl from Australia asking you if they could interview you on a podcast that was non-existent. I totally understand. But Alexa she's the co-founder of Margot New York, which is the made to measure ballet flat. And essentially, it's just honestly the coolest business. When I went in to interview them, I actually went to their offices and it was so that it's not Devil Wears Prada, it's not the right reference, but it was so that moment of like Sex in the City moment, maybe you could call it, where I went to the West Village and I had carrying my equipment and, I walked into their offices, which were in this stunning building in the West Village with gorgeous leafy outside. And then she just opened the door and was like, oh, welcome. It's so lovely that you've come all the way from Australia, which I literally had to meet them. But I remember going upstairs and then seeing their shoes displayed around that. Like it was just the most surreal experience to just meet these incredible women. Or there was her and her co-founder, Sarah, who was the second guest on my ever guest on my show, to meet these just such beautiful women who had gone out there, pursued their passion and were doing what they were doing and were doing it at like such a high level. And we're doing it with that unapologetic, this is who we are, we're going big or we're going home, New York energy vibe. And I think I loved that because I think in Oz, we naturally have the tendency to kind of dumb ourselves down. Oh no, we're not that good. Or, oh, no, I'm just going to try something small. And in New York and with these women, it just was not that at all. And they're such lovely, they weren't boisterous in any means, but they were just boss women. And they were going out there at 28 or however old they were and just building this company all in. And we just talked about their journey. And I literally remember leaving that building and going back to, I was staying in downtown at the time, and just having a moment where I thought, Mish, you have to think bigger.
I absolutely love that for so many reasons. I'm also quite hung up on the fact that I would have been dead set shitting myself walking into that building and just being like, fuck, did I pack the power cord? Is this microphone even going to work? Am I going to trip over? Yeah. It makes me feel a little sick imagining it, but I really like it.
Oh, I was absolutely beyond. I was stuttering through the first couple of words. Like I was so nervous. I don't think I've ever been more nervous in my life, but they were just so lovely and so welcoming. And I think that's also what I realized when you do put your hand up to do something that's a little bit different, or to take the extra step, to step just outside of your comfort zone, or way outside for me in that case, you will be rewarded. It's just that simple. And I think I saw that on that day, over 5 years ago now, with Alexa and with Sarah, and just how open they were. I remember thanking them profusely, so many times around, oh, thanks for meeting me. And they were just like, of course, what you're doing, we love what you're trying to build. This is great. And I think also their confidence in what I was doing gave me confidence in what I was doing. So I pay so much to the co-founders of Margot, because without that, you may not have the confidence to keep going.
It's so true. And naturally with any business, but particularly any service-based business where you're exploring what's possible, you're dealing with people, you're creating things, you tend to go through a number of iterations before you land on something that feels right. Now, I'm saying that with confidence, and it's not the same for everybody, but it is certainly something I've noticed, which is when you start something, anything, any kind of brand or business, it just evolves a little bit. And it's one of those sticky things that people sort of don't talk about too much, because you're like, oh yeah, that was a bit shit. Let me just push that one to the side and let's just deal with the shiny one that's here. But you don't get to the shiny one without the shitty iterations and the random iterations. Can you tell me about some of your random iterations for your business from there?
Love this question. It's so funny because whenever I tell the New York story, everyone's like, oh, wow. And then, oh, I get it. And then you started a podcast agent. It was so successful. And then and now you're number one. Oh, and oh my goodness, it was not like that at all. New York was the peak, and then it went boom. Not in a bad way. It just got really tough. And I think it was so lovely to have that high of being in that city and interviewing these amazing people. But then the question became, well, what the hell? What are we going to do with this? It's all great and well and all and good to have a podcast and to have people that you're speaking to. And that's awesome. And I was really proud of that. But I was also thinking, what can I do with this? There is something here. And because of my frustration with the corporate world at the time, I knew I didn't want to go back into that. And so I think the discovery phase, and I love that you bring this up, the pivoting, the discovery phase when you first start out is really quite brutal. And for me, it was really brutal. To give you context, I had apart from 2 years in finance as a literally analyst, I had no real world experience. I never had worked in media. I didn't even know that was an industry. Never worked in media before. I'd never worked in production. I literally was so fresh and so wide-eyed. And honestly, that naivety is what got me through for sure. It's what made me decide to turn it into a business and go pretty much full-time pretty quickly. But it was brutal. The next 2 years that followed, I shake my head. You guys can't see me, but I'm shaking my head because they were some of the darkest times for me. I think when you set out to start something, and at the time I knew the podcast was there, I had no idea that I was going to ultimately end up starting a podcast agency. That didn't exist. That concept didn't exist at the time. So I had no idea really how I was going to turn it into a business, although I knew I wanted to. And so it was just hustling. Hustling. Firstly, I tried a social media marketing company. Then I tried to get sponsorship for the show. That toppled over. Then I literally had about 5 or 6 businesses. Then I was like, oh, I've now learned all these amazing things from these people. Maybe I can teach other millennials. So I started the career coaching business, almost a life coaching business. That toppled over. And this was all happening during this 2 pivotal year period where a lot of my friends were getting their really shiny, beautiful corporate jobs and climbing up the ladders. And I came back from my trip to New York, and then I did a stint in the UK for a little bit. I came back home and to Oz, and I was like sitting in my parents' home, so gratefully, very grateful, but sitting in my parents' home, waking up every day, working from my bedroom, trying to figure out what the hell I was trying to do. And this isn't even a poor me story. It genuinely just was. It's really tough when you can't figure out what you're supposed to be doing, but you have such a drive to figure it out. Mm-hmm. And to give you context, this wasn't a couple of months of me, testing the waters. No, I'd quit my jobs and I was doing this full time for 2.5 years before I figured out what the Pierce Project was going to be.
It's such a part of the journey that happens for so many of us. It's very closely linked to my own journey of my passion is just to keep trying things and
following the energy, following the passion, following the nectar, as Mason Taylor says. I feel like I quote him all the time now. I'm obsessed. But, following the energy and seeing where it goes. And that could be a really painful process as well, because you kind of get hooked on an idea and you're like, yes, I think it might be this. And then you go through all the motions of putting that out into the world. Often you invest a little bit of money into that. You certainly invest a lot of time and a lot of yourself and a lot of your emotions into putting it out into the world. And then people find out about it. And that's what I always find is the really awkward thing. I imagine that happened for you. Like, cool, like I'm doing a social media marketing, or I have to promote the bloody thing. So now people know about it. Oh, now I'm doing the millennial coaching. Okay, so I need to tell people that I'm doing that and present to the world as a coach. Tell me about that experience of perhaps putting it out there and then reeling it back in and pivoting again.
It's funny. I always joke with my best friend also runs a company, and her and I have our weekly calls, and we always do our deep dives into how was your life? How was your business this week? We always say in business, it breaks you so much that you almost need to have no shame. And I think, the first time it happened, so much shame, just like, oh my goodness, I can't believe it. People are seeing on my social media that I've got this business. It's going nowhere. And now I've swapped to something else. And then it's almost just like you get to a point. I distinctly remember this. It was maybe a year in, and I literally just got to the end of that year. All failed businesses all throughout the year. Oh, how was your year? Oh, really great. Failed at about 3 different businesses this year. It was awesome. How was yours? And
Amen.
I actually dread that question hugely. I hated when people said, what do you do? Oh, I can't, it would break me. Just someone asking me a basic question. Fair enough that I want to know, what do you do with your life? I felt like saying to them, I actually have no idea what I'm doing. I don't know what I do, because that's what it was. And I think for me at the end of that first year, I just told myself, if you are not prepared to make a fool of yourself time and time again in front of everyone you do not deserve to ultimately make the millions, have the things, make the impact. You just don't. It's just not how this works. And it was a really tough, hard truth I had to tell myself. And as I said, it was not until another year later until I figured out what we were going to do. And then we launched the company, and then things started to look up. And so I think sitting in that position and just having that knowing, and it's so tough to get there. I'm not saying this was after a lot of crying and many, many moments with myself. I actually did go and get a job at one point because it was so painful, but then I quit after about 4 months because I was like, this isn't right for me. But again, it's just, you really face yourself in this journey. And it's something that I don't think is talked about enough. And so, to directly answer your question, you have to make a fool of yourself. That's it. And you have to get comfortable making a fool of yourself, because now I sit here and go, far out, I'm so grateful I made a fool of myself, and people are no longer laughing. In fact, it's quite the opposite.
Healthy delusion and no shame. I just wrote down on my notepad here, because I think those two things are so important, and it really is a journey to get there. You don't always just rock up being able to go out and put yourself out there with no shame, but bit by bit, you put a little toe in the water, you put a bigger toe in the water, you put yourself out there like, I survived. I really don't give a shit about what those people think anymore. You gotta just stay in your lane. And, if you have to, just bloody block them on socials, just get them out of your eye line and just go for it. I absolutely love that lesson. I think it's very important. I want to get to the Peers Project. So the today iteration of the business. Take me back to your first client. So landing your first client. What was that experience like? And you don't have to say who it was. You don't have to out anybody. But just tell me about the experience.
I can absolutely tell you. Oh my goodness, that was such a joy. I think when you go through this process, about 2.5 years into my journey and about 6 months after I launched the business, we landed, I would talk about my first big client. It all happened within like a month of each other. My first client, my first lot of clients, I would say. And that was the fashion retailer Forever New. And saying that now is wild, because they were like my second client, and obviously national retailer, massive. And I remember the moment so distinctly when I got the email, that, and then when I signed my first sponsor for my personal show. But I remember the day. I had been in discussions with Forever New for such a long time. I can't even tell you how long, probably about 6 months, that whole period there. And I was almost in disbelief by the fact that I was in discussions with them. But at the same time, I was in discussions with another fashion brand at the time that was also quite notable. And they both were in the same complex. So I was in Melbourne at the time. The head offices were both in this one complex in Hawthorne. And I remember I'd go for meetings from one to the other. And when I landed Forever New, we were going to produce Australia's first fashion retailer podcast. And I was sitting in my car. It was December 2019, so close to the end of the year. And I just thought, I got to get something through the door. I cannot end another year without something to say. And I knew that they were close, but they'd made us jump through so many hoops with so many proposals and so many meetings that I didn't know how it was going to go. And I got the email and it flashed up on my screen on my phone. And I remember looking at it and it said something like, yep, that's great. This is confirmation. Here's the attached signed agreement. We're really excited to start working together next year. And I cannot even tell you, it was as if the weight on my shoulders, the weight from the last 2.5 years of just so much failure, just almost lifted in that one moment. And I was in my car. I was supposed to go somewhere else. I don't know what happened, but I drove to the nearest Forever New, which was at the time in Doncaster in Melbourne at the Westfield there. And I remember I parked my car. I'm almost shaking while I don't really know what's happening. I run up the escalators and I burst through the doors and I knew exactly where it was in the shopping center, the Forever New. And I walk up to it and I still have the selfie to this day. It was only 4 years ago now, but I still have it just saved in my favorites of me taking selfies, this crazy ass girl jumping up and down outside the front of Forever New, taking selfies. Like the shop assistants may have been like, is she right? Like, gather yourself. And I walked in and just everything sparkled to me. I just everything, all the clothes, everything. The shop assistant, how you got really great, really great. I remember everything sparkled. And that's just how I felt. Everything in my life had started to sparkle. And I was like, that hell was so worth it.
Did you tell the shop assistant that you were about to make a podcast?
I didn't tell the shop assistant.
That would have been so
because
tempting.
I was so scared that it was all going to be a dream and that I'd wake up in the new year and it didn't happen, but it did happen. It very much so happened. And it was amazing.
How did it feel to then sit down and figure out how to produce a podcast for Forever New now that they were signed? What was that like? Because you actually got to do the work all of a sudden.
I mean, after that glorious one day of just bliss, yeah, look, reality set in. But I think when you've jumped through so many hoops to even just by that stage, I had been through so much. It almost felt like this is just one other hoop I've got to jump through. And I was really grateful at the time because the way I had launched the company was that we did already have a contract team almost waiting there. Naturally, you don't pay people when it's contract and they're freelance until the work comes in. So I had got all the people waiting there just ready to go. And so I think that gave me a lot of confidence knowing I had these really high level creative professionals behind me when we thought about, okay, how are we actually going to do this? But look, I won't lie. There was moments of breaking down and crying through the next couple of months and just, having never done it at that level, any campaign at that level with that kind of client before. And I'm just really grateful for the team that I had at that time. I think without them, there's just absolutely no way I would have been able to execute on this. But again, I think it's who we surround ourselves with that ultimately lift us up when we can't do it or when we can't do it all, which as entrepreneurs, I think we like to think we can. And a lot of the times we can, we're great, but being able to surround ourselves with those people that can help and can really elevate was a huge learning for me at the time.
Yeah, I agree. I think it can be a real downfall for the entrepreneur, but it can also be a real crusher of the entrepreneurial spirit in thinking that you have to know how to do every single thing for the thing that you want to create, no matter what it is. If it's a service-based offering, if it's a product, no matter what, that fear of I don't know how to do this yet is so much of a barrier to getting started. But there is, as you go through the journey, it's certainly taken me a little while to figure this out. And so I'm probably telling some people like, yeah, duh, Kim, like you don't have to fucking do everything. But there's so much about not getting started and that fear of, I don't know what this is going to look like. So I'm so scared to start and you don't even realize that that's a thought that you're having. It's just, But there's so many people out there that can help you, and you can get your way through it. You just have to have a little bit of that no shame filter to ask for help, to build the team around you, to not know what it looks like yet, to just focus on the vision and to just keep going. And it's so great to hear that you were able to just keep going and just keep pushing through.
You've hit something really important there, which is that not wanting to start because I'm afraid I don't know what to do. And I think something that's worked really well for me, like in this instance with Forever New, I had to start. I put myself in a position where there was money on the table. I'd worked so hard to get that deal. There was just almost no other way. And as much as that can be stressful, I think I've done that so many times in this journey. If I think back to the podcast, I booked that flight to New York before I knew before I even really I think I had like 2 guests booked in, but I took that one action that meant I'm going to have to take the rest because I can't lose out on a $2,000 flight to New York. I'm not going to do that. So I make the stakes just that little bit higher that I have to execute, because I also am totally the person that's like, oh, don't know, maybe that's just a future me problem. But when we do things or just take one bold action, it forces us to, I've got to get my ducks in a row. I've got to figure out how to do this. It becomes less of a, oh no, can I do it? And more a crap, I need to figure this out. So we've got to make it happen. And sometimes that shift is really helpful.
That's so true. Just get a little bit scared. Just get on the edges and make it so that you can't back out of something. I really like that. It's a good way to tackle it. Is there one thing that you wish you knew before you started this journey?
It's going to take time. It just does. Anything good does. Figuring out who you are, what you're about, what impact you're going to make in the world. It just takes time. And I'm by no means have I figured it all out. I'm still absolutely navigating through this. And I mean, I say this to you all the time, Kim. I had my quarter life crisis and started this business, but I'm sure I'll have my midlife crisis and start another or quit or something. So, I definitely don't feel like I've learned it all or figured it all out, but giving yourself time and not just months, years to figure things out is so important. Giving yourself that grace to go, you know what, even if it's been a year and I just haven't figured it out, I gave myself that year. Well, maybe you need another. And if I think back on my journey, I needed so many years, probably so many more than most people, because I was starting very young with zero experience. But I gave myself, there's obviously a benefit in that. I gave myself, just because of the lower risk in terms of responsibility, but even still, I gave myself time. And that's just, I personally think it's the greatest gift. It is the greatest gift that we can give to ourselves.
Time and a little bit of patience with ourselves as well. It's not always going to fit into the perfect window that you give yourself, but it's just about reassessing and doing it over and over and over again as many times as you have to. You've already shared so much in this podcast and in this interview with me. You also share a lot about business journey and about backing yourself on your TikTok as well. You're putting yourself out there in a way that is really powerful for other people as well to learn from, but also has a really fantastic benefit for yourself too, to be like, all right, I'm putting myself out there. I'm doing this. This is happening. As we get to the end of our episode together, putting yourself out there, getting the support of others, growing, that's 100% what it's all about. It's all about community. So my last question for you, Michelle, is what can myself and the community listening do for you?
Oh, I've loved this. This has been so fun. Thank you so much for having me, Kim. I'd love if you could follow us. We're at The Peers Project on Instagram. We're always posting there. And I'd love, you just mentioned the TikTok that I've started. I've recently started a TikTok channel all about daily business and podcasting tips. So that is just Mish. So it's at Mish and my last name, Akhidenor. So I'm sure Kim will link him up in the show notes. And you can also feel free to follow me on LinkedIn or connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm quite active on LinkedIn. It's just Michelle Akhidenor there.
I love LinkedIn. It's such an underappreciated. I think I've said this in so many podcasts now. It's a real theme that's coming out. LinkedIn is the jam. TikTok, I'm not so sure I'm super comfortable with yet, but I am very inspired by you for doing it. I will absolutely have the links to all of those in the show notes, as well as your podcast, Peers to Peers. Yes. We'll make sure that that's linked in there too. As always, Michelle, it's a pleasure to spend time with you. Thank you for sharing your journey with me.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for listening to Unemployed and Afraid, the stories of starting over with your host, me, Kim Curtin. If you love it, you can say thanks with a star rating and a review, and of course, join the community on Instagram and LinkedIn. Find us at Unemployed and Afraid. See you there.